Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
So we're off this week and releasing a From the Vault Jaws 2 episode that was recorded, I believe, in summer of 2019. But we listened back to, and I think it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a huge fan of Jaws 2, you might disagree with us a little bit. But I think we had a good conversation. We talked about things we liked eventually, but we didn't love it. But there's stuff to talk about in there.
Yeah.
So that's
it was your first time seeing it too, which I remember being a little bit surprised. I felt like a lot of people had seen this movie, but you somehow missed it. I mean, there's some iconic scenes in that movie that like people are going to remember. So I think it's worth talking about. And I thought we had a good discussion about like sequels in general, which I think is worth it. You know, if you have thoughts about the phenomenon of sequels, when they go right, when they go wrong. We got into some of that, which I think was interesting.
The famous tagline, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, is this movie, right? So it's like,
I think so.
That's at least iconic in and of itself.
We also are coming in after a fraught election where we're both feeling better, I think it's safe to say, about America, and a little bit relieved. Lots of work to be done. Lots of stuff still to fight for. Just one fight along the way, but a very important one. This had to happen. Biden was elected, and it's been nice to get a little bit more sleep than I feel like I have been over the last 4 years. These last few nights.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the biggest thing is just no more Trump. So it's.
Well, unfortunately, we have to put up with some shit until the 20th. But yeah. Soon, no more Trump. Anyway, we're getting on a tangent here. This is a bonus episode released to the main feed because we're off. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. We'll be back next week with Cinderella. We are covering the 1997 movie and the original Brothers Grimm story, which I'm sure are going to be quite different from one another. It should be fun to sort of get into the differences there and watch that movie. Actually, I've never seen that version of Cinderella, so I'm excited to get into that too.
Yeah, well, we hope you enjoy this. This, like we said, former Patreon exclusive, being released into the regular feed. So, some of them get released, some of them don't. If you are interested, maybe check out our Patreon if you wanted to see, because this is like a year and a half later. So if you wanted to get the latest and greatest stuff, maybe check that out.
Yeah, we've definitely got a lot more episodes. We put a new one out every month on there. Anyway, enjoy.
So we chose this project because we've put it up to a poll a couple of times, and it's always kind of been there's a lot of interest in it. It's been in second place a couple of times, and we were like, let's just do Jaws 2 here at the end of the summer.
It's come in like second or third on a lot of polls, and we really love the original Jaws, and that is one of our projects from our first summer, I think, when we were doing kind of our Summer of Monsters, and we enjoyed those episodes immensely. And this was kind of interesting because it kind of it brought some of that feeling back. You mentioned to me this week when we talked about it that you don't think you'd ever seen this movie. So I'm curious, after watching it, is that true? Had you never seen it?
I don't think I had, no. I feel like at some point I thought I had. I think I've seen one of the other ones, like Jaws 3D or whatever the other one's called.
There's a Jaws 4 and maybe a 5.
I think I've seen.
There's definitely 4. I'm revisiting this. I had seen it before. I think I've maybe seen it 2 or 3 other times, but it's been a long time. And then obviously this was kind of a whole different experience watching it now. But I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are on this movie.
Okay, I kind of wanted you to go first, but I'm willing to go first if you want me to.
Someone who's never seen it before, I don't want to affect your statements or your opinions. I want to hear them.
This movie sequels in general are tough, but I felt that this movie was like really, really lame. I did not enjoy watching this movie.
I'm not very surprised to hear that.
In my opinion, it's like the definition of like what a pale imitation, like diminishing returns sequel. It just is that in every way. And I liked seeing some of the same landscapes, some of the, like, Martha's Vineyard I think was back.
Yeah.
They were able to use the score a little bit, but I was surprised at how much some of the same characters. Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't use the score more than they did. But so there's little moments maybe of reminiscing of Jaws, kind of making me think of Jaws, but at the end of the day, I was like, oh God, this is like really, really bad. And after I did some research after watching it, I found some stuff about it that might point to why.
Okay. I'm definitely interested to hear that. Let me weigh in a little bit. Yeah, I agree with you. And at the end of the movie, I kind of summed it up with this idea. I was like, this movie is what people think Jaws 1 is if they've never seen it and just know it's about a shark like attacking people at a beach. Like, yeah. That's what I think. If you don't know anything about Jaws and you don't have interest in it, it's because you think it's this movie, which is like it's stripping away all the things about Jaws 1 that make it actually really creative, interesting, have a lot of depth, all the things that make it a classic film, and replacing it with all of the sort of like, we're going to focus on shark attacks, it's going to be sort of exploitative, and it's going to be just kind of shallow. And I felt like that was what was left when they made this sequel. It was like they misidentified the things about the first one that made it popular, or maybe they just didn't care, and they decided to just slap it together and make this sort of poor imitation. So I agree with that, absolutely. And it's funny because I think this is actually one of the more well-regarded Jaws sequels, maybe even the most well-regarded.
I mean, it very well may be, but I think the things that I didn't like about it were, the main thing for me was a severe lack of memorable characters in any way. I didn't care about any of the characters. They even made me care less about Brody than I did in the first movie.
Yeah.
And like he like loses his job and like this and that, and I'm just like, I just can't even stay invested in the character that I was invested in the first movie.
I agree. I do think his stuff is some of the strongest stuff. The idea of him being sort of haunted by what happened to him and having like PTSD about it and overreacting, and then like now he's not being believed for a different reason of like people assume he's just been traumatized, and that stuff was kind of working for me. It doesn't feel like it quite lands, and it had more potential than it would necessarily like what they did with it. But that's some of the best stuff in the movie, but that's not saying a lot considering my overall opinion of the movie.
So I agree with you. That's definitely the best stuff. And something that I realized while watching was that they really decided to, we really liked Quint. We really like, I think his name Hooper, right?
Hooper.
Yeah, Hooper,
yeah. They reference him in the movie too.
Right. Yeah. But Hooper,
he's off
Quint,
in Antarctica.
Yeah, and Brody. Hooper, Quint, and Brody were like the main three characters that hooked us in with different. They're very different characters, and they hooked us in, and we were invested in them as people. So what I think they tried to do with this one was say, all right, we weren't able to get anybody else to come back. We don't want to really introduce any other characters. We kind of want to ride on the coattails of the first one. So they were like, let's just move into a direction where it's really just a movie about Brody. It's just a one character movie. Everybody else around him is satelliting. There's really no other storylines going on. I guess
I was actually really disappointed with the teenagers in this movie, because in my memory of it, I thought they like were more realized characters with some sort of character arcs to them, but none of them are actually. They're all just sort of horny teenagers who want to hook up with each other. Various levels of like, oh, you're nerdy, oh, you're too skinny, or you're this and that. And other than that, that's all they really are. They're all very flat. They don't seem to really go anywhere. No one has moments of bravery or moments of things that like sort of elevate them. There's just not a lot there with the kids in this movie, and it was kind of sad to see.
Yeah, I think so. We talked about in the first in our coverage of the first movie how it can be seen as like a monster movie, right? The original can be seen as this monster movie, and yeah. I think they took that to 11, and they were like, let's just make Jaws a slasher. Like, let's just make the horny teenagers, all the cliches. We'll throw the creature in there. We'll show the creature a lot, which is also something I read something about. But just in general, we talked about the Hitchcockian nature of like Spielberg's first film. Like having studied Hitchcock and realizing that like the suspense is what people are in for, and ultimately, there's like a payoff, but keep them in suspense for as long as possible, as long as it's interesting. I don't know. This one was this is like the opposite in my opinion. It kind of reminds me of a bad
in the
version.
Opening credits, they show the shark. Yeah, such a mistake.
It reminds me of a bad version of like in the way that Alien was kind of like the hidden alien that's on the ship and there's building suspense.
horror film, and then aliens, showing like tons of aliens, and they're like, you know, Marines, Space Marines are fighting them, that kind of thing. But I would say that this is the bad version of that, like not realizing what you could have done with potentially making this more of like an out and out, not, I don't know, a different type of horror movie, I guess.
That's true. And in fact, I would say that the original Alien is the actual sequel to Jaws. Real, because that is a movie that understands what made Jaws amazing. And it does that, but it does it in space, and it does it with a different creature, and obviously all this stuff, right? But I think it really understood what made that movie so good. And it brings a lot of the same elements to the table, with like great characters, with in-depth storylines, and a rich world building, and a creature that is more frightening for the fact that you see it less and understand it less. And they nail all of that in Alien, which was, I think, originally pitched as Jaws in space. So
I'm sure, yeah.
I think that's the real sequel to Jaws.
I like that, too.
Yeah. So focusing more on characters, I just want to dial in a little more, because I was thinking about it, and you have these three characters really bouncing off each other in Jaws. You have Quint, Brody, and Hooper, like you said. And Hooper is sort of the science-y guy who, like, he knows more than everybody else, yet he doesn't maybe know the way of the world like Quint does. And so him and Quint are always clashing over Quint's experience on the sea and his sort of like old knowledge, whereas Quint has the new knowledge of science and all this stuff, right? And you have these two things clashing, and then they're both faced with this creature that neither of them really understands fully. And I think that you could argue that's why Quint loses to it, essentially, right? Like, he still sort of underestimates it. And you get none of that in this movie, because both of those characters are absent. And I thought there was a moment when they had this sort of scientist on the beach talking about the killer whale, that I thought that she was kind of being the Hooper type character, but she's completely done away with after that scene, and not a character that we follow at all. So I don't know. There's just like, it felt like there was an absence in the movie because of that those characters being gone, and those kind of essential battles not being fought on the screen.
Yeah, I definitely feel that as well. Hooper, you know what's funny about this movie is that it had me questioning when I first was realizing that Richard Dreyfuss as Hooper wasn't going to be in the movie.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, so did he? It made me question whether he died or not in the original Jaws, because they do that bait and switch, right? They do like you think he's dead, but he hides or something like that. He's hiding.
Yeah, and then he comes up from the bottom. But at the end, they're swimming away together, him and Brody.
Right.
So.
Right.
But maybe he died in the book, though, so I can understand maybe.
That's okay. See, I remembered something like that, but it made me question. He did die in the book. I was like, did Hooper die? And then they
no, they made it seem like he might have died in the movie too. Definitely.
Yeah. But then so they did the Hooper shout out in this movie just to call attention to the fact that he wasn't in this movie.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of just like an eye rolling moment where I was just like, well, it's like
they couldn't get him back.
I wish you had him. Just like, don't even talk about him if you're not going to get him back.
Well, I think it's like, it makes sense. It's like, wouldn't Brody call Hooper? You know what I mean? So they had to address it somehow.
That's true. So speaking of that really quickly, Steven Spielberg and Richard Dreyfuss were approached to direct and star in the sequel, but production on Close Encounters of the Third Kind was running behind, and they declined to participate. Is the nice way, I think, that was said about them not being involved in this. But I also found something where Steven Spielberg told the San Francisco Film Festival that making a sequel to anything is a cheap, carny trick, and that he did not even respond to the producers when they asked him to direct. He claimed that the planned plot was to involve the sons of Quint and Brody hunting a new shark. David Brown said that Spielberg did not want to direct the sequel because he felt that he had done the definitive shark movie. The director later added that his decision was influenced by the problems that the Jaws production faced. He said, "I would have done the sequel if I hadn't had such a horrible time at sea on the first film."
Yeah, which we talked about, that was like a brutal shoot at the time spent at sea. I wonder how much of that there is with this movie, because there is definitely a third act that's basically all out in the water.
Yeah.
So you have
I've
all
got
these
some other
teams
stuff
sort of
about that.
improbably crashing their boats into each other, which I thought was kind of hilarious.
Yeah, I felt every single scene in this film that involved a shark attack just felt so engineered to me. None of it felt natural. It just felt like, let's put a bunch of shark attacks in this movie, because they were in the first one. There were shark attacks in the first one, but they were like, let's just do more and show the creature. And yeah,
I mean, how about when he bites that ship and the woman pours gasoline over her own head, and then and then she shoots a flare for some reason, blowing up the ship. Like, so improbable, bizarre series of events. It's so stupid.
I just feel like they were like, there's an explosion in Jaws 1. Maybe we put an explosion in Jaws 2. And like,
also,
they kept doing that.
I think they so later you see the shark has like the burnt cut up face.
Right.
And I feel like they wanted to imply in the trailers for this movie that maybe it was the same shark. And because we remember that like half of its face blew up. So I bet a lot of people went into this movie going like, are they bringing that shark back to life? Because it was definitely dead at the end. And they were like, and then like it ended up not being that. But I don't know.
I could tell at the end of this movie that when the shark went down, I was like, that shark's not dead. I mean, it got
smoke was
electrocuted.
billowing out of its eye sockets, but sure, maybe not.
That's not a dead shark. That's a sequel waiting to happen. Again.
Isn't it like, so I think it's like the mother though, or something, the mother shark, or in the fourth one, that's what it is or something. So I don't know. I think it's maybe
really?
a family of sharks.
For some reason, I thought it was like the son or daughter of the original. But yeah, I'm not steeped enough in the lore, I guess.
Yeah. Because I know the fourth film, it's like the mother from these movies is the one who is taking on the shark the one final time.
Oh, gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah.
I thought you meant the mother shark. Interesting.
No, and I think it is. I think it's the mother versus the mother shark.
The mother?
The mother of the other sharks, yeah.
Interesting. So you were talking about the production woes from the first one, and there were production woes on this one as well. I wanted to tell you a couple quick things. This film cost $30 million to produce, which is over 3 times more than the original.
Jeez. And it looks like ass compared to it.
Yeah. David Brown says that they did not budget the film because Universal would never have given a green light to a $30 million budget in those days. The Marine Division head for Universal on location, Philip Kingree, says that it cost approximately $80,000 per day to make this movie. When he was asked what his budget was, the producer responded, "We're not wasteful, but we're spending the profit from Jaws, and it will take what it takes."
Jeez.
So, little story about the barge that you mentioned. The name of the small rocky island with an electrical relay station on it was.
It looked like a set from the moment you see it from the air. It looked like such a fucking set.
Oh, it is. And wait till you hear this. So it was called Cable Junction Island. This was actually an artificially constructed. It was actually, if you couldn't tell, it was actually constructed set that which caused numerous problems during filming. The island was made from plastic fiberglass material and was set on 2 barges. The surface of it was so slippery that it was difficult to traverse and even grab hold of it. This resulted in numerous retakes having to be shot, many actors slipping and falling off it constantly. Due to it not being anchored down properly, it once drifted away in the ocean and the production had to go out and tug it back. In The Making of Jaws 2 DVD documentary, director Janos Schwark recounted the day when he was informed that his island set was on its way to Cuba.
Oh my goodness. Why? Why not just use an actual island?
Yeah. I don't know.
It just,
I can't believe they didn't learn their lesson from the first one. I mean, they went through it and then were able to pull it off, and then they were like, "Oh, we're gonna go back out there on the high seas and shoot something else, and we're gonna have a barge." And oh god, it just sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the effects of this movie, there's one moment that I just had to see if you caught. I saw it the first time, and then I rewound it and watched it again because it's so bad. The shark comes out of the water and sideswipes this boat, like runs along its edge. And when it does, the boat pulls on the rubber skin or whatever that's on the shark, and its mouth folds inward, including its teeth folding in, just like you can tell it's rubber and plastic, and it folds inward over itself, and then it comes free. Did you not see that moment?
I didn't notice it.
I might have to send you a picture after this because it's so bad. It looks so freaking fake.
I feel like I was starting to disengage with it at some point. I started to lose interest a little bit, but
it's a fine line, right? Like trying to figure out, like, why is this movie so subpar compared to the original? You know, And a lot of it is that sort of that original mentality, but also like the original even was an adaptation of a book. So why was it so much better, you know? And I think from adaptation point of view, I think it's interesting to think about, like, what made it so much better.
Yeah, I think it just has to do with understanding like what makes for compelling. Like each film is going to be compelling in a different way. The original was compelling because they understood the characters, they understood what the suspense was going to be going forward. And then with the sequel, as actually I'll tell you right now, the director realized in the first film that everyone, you know, the film was commended for leaving the shark to the imagination, but this director felt that they should show it as much as possible because the dramatic first image of it coming out of the water in the first film could never be repeated. He believed that the reduction of the first film's suspense was inevitable because the audience already knew what the shark looked like from the first film. So that I feel like that mentality partially has something to do with it, as well as I think it's a little bit. I mean, we talked about it in the first movie. Steven Spielberg was rewriting it every day, trying to get exactly what he needed to get, and some shots were being left behind that he wasn't going to be able to work with. So I think that like just that can-do attitude and the effort that he pushed it to might have something to do with the end product. But I'm sure a lot of people worked really hard on this film, and it's just unfortunate to see them kind of, you know, like I said before, it's a pale imitation, as well as kind of not pushing boundaries, you know, not doing anything new, not even just for the Jaws franchise or like a monster franchise, but just in general. It just feels like a lot of movies of that time, a lot of horror films.
This feels like the cliche about sequels that, you know what I mean? Like, this is the trap of sequels, and it falls directly into it. And because of that, it comes away feeling like a shallow money grab. Honestly, it feels like someone said, hey, this Jaws movie was crazy successful. We can't believe how much people are still talking about it. Quick, while the iron's still hot, let's put out a sequel and cash in on some of that mania. And a lot of the people who saw the first one are going to go see this new one in the movies, and we'll make a bunch of money. So let's slap it together. And that's what it feels like. Even if that's not true, that's what this movie feels like.
Yeah, and you know, the movies came out 3 years apart, so it was definitely a reaction to the success of the first one. It wasn't like it was like left to lie, and people stewed over, and they're like, oh, I want a sequel. It was like, all right,
I've really come up with a great idea for a sequel that you know feels like it needs to be made, which is the reason to do a sequel, not because hey, we need to make money, or we can make money, so let's do it.
Yeah. So this film actually was for a brief period, it was the highest grossing sequel in history because, you know, there weren't a ton of sequels up to this point.
And that is a reflection of the quality of the original movie, not this movie. That is the quality of the original movie sold tickets to this movie.
You see it happen all the time. It's just, you know, people will go see remakes and sequels and that kind of stuff. It's the name recognition that it's going to get people. And if they like that movie, they're going to check out the sequel. You know?
That's like I'm pretty sure on this fact, but I remember when we covered Game of Thrones, somewhere in there, I can't remember if I actually said it on the episode, but I read that Feast for Crows was George R.R. Martin's first #1 New York Times best-selling debut. So when it came out, it hit #1. That book hit #1 on the quality of the book that came before it, Song of Swords, which is the best book in the entire series, in my opinion. That's why that book is #1, not because of the quality of the book itself.
Yep. That's how it goes.
That's just how it goes, yeah. So that's why sequels seem to be kind of like a sure bet. Like, hey, we're going to make a bunch of money, let's do it. But you are losing some artistic integrity, honestly. And I think the character of Brody is a little bit lessened by this movie. I think the entire enterprise is sort of lessened. It honestly feels like Jaws is the sort of movie that you should kind of pretend is the only one. Now, it's possible we might ruffle some feathers with this. I think there are people out there who like the sequels, but I can understand liking the sequels as just kind of like fun shark movies, and you're just going to kind of turn your brain off and enjoy seeing these sort of monster movies that they are at sea and like the sort of that feeling. But like, I would hope that if you're a Jaws fan, you can recognize that the first movie truly is on another level from anything that we get following that.
Yeah, if it's diminishing returns. I would love to have a conversation with somebody who likes any of the sequels more than the original. You know, I would like to hear like what
I don't think people like them more. I think people might just like them, period.
Right.
And they might just defend them. But I hope that none of those people would actually look at them and say they're superior to the first film. And if they do, I would say maybe they need to go back and watch the first one again. Maybe it's been too long.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it just, to me, it's not even close. Not even close. That statement from you does make me curious, though, because Spielberg did a sequel to Jurassic Park with Lost World. He would go on to do, right?
Yeah.
So after his statement about it being a cheap trick or whatever, I'm curious to know why he went ahead and did it for his own project later.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting to think about. Like he said in the other statement that I read, though, he eventually said like he would have done a sequel if it wasn't for the crazy production. So it's like I think given the right amount of money, I think we're lucky that Steven Spielberg didn't go on to direct Jaws 2 and he went on to bigger things. You know, like I think his career and our enjoyment of his career are better off for it. But like if the studio waves a huge check in your face and you think, all right, it's 2 years of my life and I can make something that's pretty good, I think that everybody agrees with this. It's the same thing with Lost World. It's like diminishing returns. Like it just is. It just like.
Although I thinking about it though, Lost World, at least it's a different story, and it didn't try and like recreate the form and format of the first movie and just slap some new things onto it. It tried to do a whole new thing, and maybe that's why he was willing to do it. Not to mention it was also following a sequel that was written by the original author, which might have affected his reason for doing it.
Well,
right?
I was gonna say like the I don't think there's any comparison to Lost World and Jaws 2. You know what I mean? I think that he approached it as a very intelligent filmmaker who knows what people are interested in, what people connect to, and so there are good characters in Lost World. There are big moments, and it doesn't quite. It's not the same kind of movie.
Yeah,
but it's not Jaws 2.
Right. Whereas you could look at something like Jurassic World as being more of the sort of Jaws 2 of the Jurassic Park franchise, because in some sense,
especially that new one. Did you see the most recent
Kingdom?
one?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, I did actually. I watched it on a plane. But what I'm trying to say is that Jurassic World, like, obviously better than Jaws 2. I think it has more going for it, but in the sense that it was like it tries to copy the same format as Jurassic Park. It like down to like a lot of the nitty gritties of the plot echo the original film, and I felt the same way about the last
Force Awakens.
The Force Awakens. Thank you.
I was gonna say that. Yeah.
Yeah, the Force Awakens it also sort of is mimicking the format of A New Hope, and so in that sense, like there's sort of like a form copying thing that Jaws 2 did here, I guess, but probably the least successfully out of any of those examples I just gave.
Well, I would argue for specifically Lost World and the Force Awakens. There's a very clearly defined filmmaker who understands character and who understands what people connect to. So like Rey, Finn, Poe in Force Awakens, very clearly the audience is going to go along with those characters and care about what they're getting up to. Same thing with Lost World. Like it's always about the people. I think ultimately, like no matter what's going on, it's like you got to connect to the people first and foremost.
If there was a compelling drama playing out with those teenagers, that's not just like your surface level, like, oh, this one likes this one and they're jealous or something. Like actual compelling character dramas playing out with those characters when the shark attacks, it would be a lot more interesting movie. Just that alone.
Yes. With everything the same, other than the fact that the teenagers are compelling characters or interesting at least, like people
so
that we
care
like.
about what happens to them, other than that one is the son of Brody, so I guess I care what happens to him.
Right. Yep. Well, we talked a lot about bad stuff, so I just want to give the opportunity. What'd you like? What do we like about this movie?
So I liked that it reminded me of the first movie. Watching it, I will say there's the scene with the bluefish in the water and him shooting his gun at it. After seeing both of these movies when I was younger, when we went back and watched Jaws 1, I thought this scene was in Jaws 1.
Wow.
But it's not. It's in Jaws 2. So in him up on the shark the shark watching station and all that. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, other than saying that like it feels like it could have been in that movie.
I think it's a compliment. I think
that's a compliment, you know? So in that sense, that part I guess was pretty good, and that goes back to the thing that I liked most about it was the kind of the psychology of Brody now that he's paranoid about sharks. and how that informs his character, and the trouble that's causing for him. I think that stuff works pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Roy Scheider, like, he's not even like really invested in this movie, you can tell, and yet still his acting, you can see that he's head and shoulders above basically everybody else in this movie, in terms of like performance and yeah, like there's like a couple moments of contemplation I was surprised about, where, you know, he's looking at himself in the mirror after he's been fired, or he's like on the beach with his son after the attack, and after he shoots his gun, he's like, just, you know, we understand him as a character.
Casings. Yeah,
we understand that he, he cares for his family, and that's something that audiences can connect to. You know, like that's like whether that's like, you know, enough is another issue. But I think that like humanizing him and you know, having him be relatable in some way, I think that's always a plus. I mean, just like for schlockiness sake, it is fun to watch in parts, like when it bites the power line, it's way crazy over the top, and like I don't like the scene, but it's funny. Like it's just like and like I kind of enjoy it.
What I wanted more from it was good, but I wanted more was the shark attacking the helicopter. Like, yeah,
that was wild. Also,
like, I knew it was gonna happen, but I wanted it to be like even more of a memorable scene. It felt like they couldn't quite get it right, maybe.
I got something here for you.
Okay.
There is a deleted scene after the copter sinks. The shark attacks the pilot underwater. The sounds of the pilot screaming and the copter being damaged are the exact same sound from Jaws when the shark attacks the shark cage in Hooper. These sounds can be heard in other attack scenes in the movie.
Interesting.
So it sounds like there was another one. And in the final draft screenplay, the helicopter pilot and Marge, the girl that rescues Sean, both survive. The pilot is able to breathe thanks to an air bubble in the copter's cockpit, and Marge avoids the shark by diving underwater. The pilot spots Marge swimming underwater, goes after her, then guides her back inside the cockpit so they can share the air. So it sounds like there's definitely some other stuff in there.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a cool new element. And then the idea, it's like that false sense of hope of like, oh, the helicopter pilot's here to rescue us, and then the helicopter pilot who you never think is going to get attacked by the shark gets attacked by the shark. So that was a cool moment. I wish that they'd been able to like pull it off a little better, though. I mean, ultimately it was kind of cool how the way it like crumpled into the water. But I don't know. I just wanted a little more from it, I guess.
Yeah, you're kind of making me realize something with the copter thing is, there's a movie that came out that I'm sure everybody's familiar with called Sharknado. And I think that this is like the grandfather of Sharknado. I think that this is like the moment when people are starting to realize that like these like really schlocky movies can be fun. And like that's to say like everybody likes something, and you know, something is loved by someone. But you know, I've never found much merit in those movies, but I know that I've known people who go to like Sharknado parties and stuff and dress up and stuff.
So bad it's good kind of movies.
Right.
It's like a phenomenon. It's like either it's going to strike you or it's not. The thing that reminds me of that is the phenomenon of like campiness in movies.
Now but there's a separation for me with that, because I do enjoy some campy movies, and I do enjoy a bad movie, but I think it's very specifically like there's this niche of like sharks and making really bad movies. I don't know what it is. You know what I mean? Like Sharknado is like its own very specific thing, because I do like really cheesy, really bad horror movies and things like that. Like I'm into that kind of stuff, but I think there's like very specific. I don't like movies that are bad for the sake, like when they're making them, they're like, this is a bad movie. I find that to be less interesting than a bad movie that just so happens to be fun to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so campiness is something that I've thought a lot about of late, because I think I've changed the way I feel about it. Because in the past, I think I would bounce hard off of campiness. I would see campiness as like the cheese is off-putting. It's bad movie making. It's bad storytelling, and I would immediately bounce off of it. Whereas I've started to appreciate that it's there for like a different reason, and it operates in a different way. And it is sort of like a fun thing, and I realized when I started to realize that movies like the Fast and the Furious franchise are action camp is essentially what they are, because they've gotten so over the top and they're aware of it now. Obviously not originally, But people love it for those reasons, and they go in expecting it to be, and like even like a John Wick movie is sort of an action campy movie. You know what I mean? Because
there's a certain self-awareness to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we know that this is ridiculous, yet we're doing it anyway. And then like when I started seeing that in action movies, and you can recognize it in horror movies too, who do this sort of thing, and you can recognize.
Well, like you recently mentioned Evil Dead 2, and that's like the epitome
absolutely.
of like a campy like horror film.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's when it embraced the campiness to it. I think that's when that franchise really took off, obviously. And I don't know, as I'm starting to recognize this different genres and realizing that even though I'm not a big fan of like the new Fast and the Furious movies or the Ben and Hobbs, what is it?
Hobbs and Shaw.
Hobbs and Shaw, thank you. I think Calvin and Hobbs, whatever.
Calvin and Hobbs.
Hobbs and Shaw that's another extension of this sort of like campy action movie. And I'm realizing that there is a place for those things, and that people enjoy them because of that. Not because they're like looking for dumb entertainment, but because they recognize that it's ridiculous.
Well,
and they're
I would
signed
say,
up for it. They're like, that's why I want to see it. It's ridiculous.
So I agree with you, and like I don't want, if somebody likes something, I don't want to tell them you can't like that, or it's bad to like that, or anything like that. But I think there are people who watch movies like that fully buy in, not realizing that there's a self-awareness to it, thinking like this is awesome in every way. This is, you know what I mean? Like, I think there are those people as well, but I totally get what you're saying.
I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of people out there in the world. I'll agree with you there. But I think the majority of fans of those things recognize that they're ridiculous and like them, write them for the reason of it's so insane and over the top. I love it. And that's, they just like it for that reason.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're a fan of this movie, ultimately, to bring it back around, I think if you're a fan of this movie, it's probably for a reason like that. Like it's like, this is just like having fun with Jaws. Let's just make a shark the bad guy and get into hijinks with them and have a big electrical wire and have it taken down a helicopter, and just what kind of craziness can we get into with a shark? And then you go see Shark 3D and it's busting through the glass at SeaWorld, and you got, it just gets crazier and crazier as the movies go on. And if you like that and you can just buy into the over the top nature of it, and you're just signed up for like, I just want to see more sharks going crazy in these movies, then I think you can enjoy these movies. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm not quite that person. Ultimately, to me, it's too much of a pale imitation of the original, like we talked about. Like the original is just too good a movie to have a sequel like this.
Right. It's just such a different stratosphere of movie watching. It's like I'm not looking to go watch Sharknado and analyze what the intentions of the artists were. You know what I mean? So
maybe we should.
Maybe we should, yeah. I mean, there probably is something there to it. I admittedly have never seen that movie. I've never seen Sharknado. Yeah. So, but I mean, I feel like I understand what the movie is.
I mean, it's right there in the title.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what else to say about this movie, man. I don't regret watching it. I'd seen it before. I do wonder. I worry a little bit about like the diminishing effect it can have. I try not to let other movies affect like sequels affect my way I feel about an original film, especially when it's a different director and different writers and stuff. Although I think Carl Gottlieb wrote on both. But there's no source material for this. It was loosely based off of Peter Benchley's original characters. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that I think this movie doesn't diminish my appreciation of the original. I think I can just sort of distance myself from it and be fine. How did you feel about seeing it? Do you kind of regret seeing it? Does it affect the way you feel about the first movie at all? Or what do you think?
No. I'm in the same boat as you. I'm not going to ever say like, this. I think that a legacy can be tarnished in a way. I think people can say like, oh, Jaws as a franchise isn't amazing, isn't like what maybe you would have hoped. But I'm never gonna let one movie dictate how I felt about another movie. In general, I think that like something that I've always subscribed to is just this idea of like, I can find something good in any movie. I'm never going to regret having seen something because I usually learn something on it, right? I'm usually like, well, that, even if it's something bad, there's something to be learned from it. And I think that for a movie like this, I'm definitely walking away thinking this is another movie I have to pull from and think about. And like, maybe there is a way that you can reference a movie like this or get something important out of a film like this. Whether it's don't do something like that or do something like that is to be determined by the artist. But I think that I'm never like, oh, I wish I hadn't seen it. For the most part, I guess there are times that I'm like, wow, that was pretty low. But something like this, yeah. I mean, how could I have not eventually seen Jaws 2? It's the sequel to Jaws. I think that's why it made so much money. That's how everybody felt about it. So, having said that, I'm happy that I've seen it.
Man, and not to like get back into it, but there is such a fine line between having effects that transport you into a world and convince you that something is real, and having effects that don't. And the shark effects in this movie just didn't. Like it so many times watching it, I'm like, it's such an obvious like puppet or thing they're dragging through the water or however they're doing it. Like it looks so fake, and I don't know what it is about. But like when I watch the original Jaws, that happens very infrequently. For the most part, I'm completely immersed in it, and I believe that this shark is real. And I just couldn't quite get there with this movie that had a bigger budget and should have been able to do an even better job with it, and it just didn't. Yeah, I don't know.
Movie magic. They had the movie magic on the first one.
Well, and I think that comes into like knowing what shots to use and knowing how to use a prop in a way to make it feel real versus show a prop and make it so that it looks obviously like a prop.
Yeah. On the day, like knowing like how can you fool the camera? How can you when you get back in the edit room? Where is the exact frame that you cut in order to hide that wonky looking second that happens right after this perfect moment you can use? That's for sure something else to talk about there. I wanted to mention one shark attack. There's one where the girl's swimming in the water. I think it's when the teenagers are all out there. And it almost looks like the shark just like brushes up against her, and then we go to like a hard cut to her stomach or like abdomen area like bleeding. Yeah, it's just like the shark attacks were very, very cheesy and like very.
Well,
like,
I think they were trying to show the roughness of the shark skin. They were like, we've read that shark skin is like sandpaper because it is. Especially it's like certain directions. So I think that was what that was trying to show, that like even brushing up against it will rip you open because its skin is so harsh and sandpapery.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not concrete. It's not asphalt that you're falling. Like it's like I don't know. It's funny. Just a moment of you were talking about like the attack effects and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a bunch of different ones. The idea that the shark is going to like chase down the water skier and attack it is pretty ridiculous. Like it's like they took everything and they put it over the top, here in a way that the first one wasn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we've talked enough about Jaws 2. We hope you guys appreciate that. Thank you guys.